Hi, welcome back. I'm Lon Schiffbauer, and today we are talking about how to assess global market opportunities. After all, there's a lot of countries out there and a lot of opportunities. Which ones make the most sense? Okay, so let's come on over here and let's dig into this. Now, first of all, I'm going to offer this posit. Innovation and entrepreneurship are the engines of growth. So, in other words, what I would like us to do is to consider that the best country in which to grow, expand, do business, enter is the country that best enables us to practice innovation and entrepreneurship. So, if we go forward with that supposition, let's see which countries and which sort of environments make the most sense. But first, I want to define innovation so that we know what we're talking about. So, innovation includes both radical and incremental improvements in products, processes, organizations, practices, strategies, you name it. Here's the thing with innovation, it's a pretty exciting word. And when we think about innovative and, we think groundbreaking and monumental and just pushing things forward. Okay, that's fine. That's awfully sexy. But innovation can also be incremental improvements, just moving things forward ever so slightly. So we can apply innovation, both radical and incremental, to new products, designs, functionality, as well as manufacturing methods, business processes, service delivery models, communications. Here's the thing. Oftentimes, when we think of innovation, yes, we think big and groundbreaking, and we also think about technology, something you plug in, as though the only kind of technology is something you plug in. Innovation really should be allowed to work its magic on every aspect of business, including things like business processes and manufacturing methods and service delivery models. So the countries and environments that best allow us to exercise this sort of innovation are going to be our best opportunities. Now, I keep talking about both radical and incremental innovation. Let me throw this chart out there for you. So you've got technology and you've got your business model. Both of these can be a target for innovation. And then you have something that's near to existing versus brand new, near to existing or brand new. And then you're looking at how radical something is. So, for example, if we take, say, a recording device, okay, and a recording device is a recording device, okay, but this one allows us to change out different microphones. Ooh, is that innovation? Well, yes, I would say that that is an existing technology and that its existing business model, therefore, because it's still a microphone, it's incremental innovation. On the other hand, let's say, for example, that we have this microphone, and when I speak into it, it can, via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, throw the text up on the screen. That's something quite different. That is a new business model and, frankly, a new technology. So that would be a pretty radical innovation. And as you can see, we can run the gambit here from new to existing to business to technology. The point is, the environment that allows us to apply the whole breadth of innovation to business models, products, services, you name it, is going to be the environment that is best for our success. Okay, let's continue on. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurialism is one of these really overused words. You know the word, you've heard the word, you may have even used it in a sentence, but can you define it? Well, there's any number of definitions for an entrepreneur, but for the sake of our argument here, I would submit to you that an entrepreneur is somebody who can commercialize innovations to new products or services. In other words, it's one thing to be able to come up with an idea. Hell, I can come up with an idea. It's quite another thing to figure out how to monetize, how to commercialize this idea, how to take an idea, turn it into a product or service offering that a consumer is willing to pay money for. And not just money, but more money than it takes for you to create the product or service. Okay? So that's what an entrepreneur does. Now, does an entrepreneur start a business? Sure. Does an entrepreneur figure out how to scale the business to demand? Absolutely. But first and foremost, an entrepreneur knows how to monetize, commercialize ideas and innovations. Okay? So, this means that a good entrepreneur can really manage the natural tension between creativity and value capture. Creativity meaning, oh, I have all these cool ideas, I'm going to get, totally rich, man. And then who knows what, right? Whereas value capture is that monetization aspect. How are you going to capture value? How are you going to commercialize? How are you going to monetize this cool idea that you had while walking a dog, right? So a company needs strength in both and needs to have an environment in which both can thrive, both creativity, innovation, as well as the monetization, value capture side. Creativity without the ability to translate it into profit can be fun, but it's unsustainable. Profits without creativity is rewarding, but only works in the short term. If we want long-term business success in the global market, we need both elements. Okay? Now, a great example of a failure to capture value from innovation can actually be found in the story of Xerox PARC. Now, I'm going to give you a quick primer on this story, but you're welcome to Google it and learn quite a bit more about this. But many years ago, back in the 70s or some, 70s, Xerox, which is a U.S. company based out in Rochester, New York, said, you know what? We need more innovation. We need more creativity. We need more new ideas. And so they built this research park out in Palo Alto, California, filled it with beanbag chairs, and told employees to show up in casual clothes, sit around, and just create. And that's what they did. That's an innovative bunch of folks there. What did they create? Well, they created some stuff that had never seen before. They created the WYSIWYG desktop. What you see is what you get. Actually, it's WYSIWYG printer. I'm sorry. What you see is what you get printing. The desktop is a GUI interface, graphic user interface, right? And the idea is that you take this thing called a mouse. Yeah, this didn't exist before this, folks. You take this thing called a mouse and you move things around on your desktop, right? And you have files and folders. And when you're done, you put it in the trash. I mean, all of this stuff was revolutionary. Well, they showed it to their bosses off at Rochester, New York. And the bosses said, so cool, but how is this going to help us sell copiers? After all, that's what Xerox is. They are a copy company, make copiers. Well, they're like, I don't know, you just told us to innovate and stuff. And Xerox said, okay, well, we're not quite sure what to do with this. In other words, they had innovation, they had creativity, but they did not know how to capture the value. Well, you probably know the rest of the story. A guy named Steve Jobs came along, saw this. He knew exactly how to capture value from it. He was an entrepreneur. And he hired a whole bunch of folks. He created with these folks, he created his own versions of this. And this is what became the first Macintosh with a GUI interface and WYSIWYG printing. And then Windows picked it up, and the rest is history. Okay. And yet Xerox missed the bus. All right. So let's continue on. All right, so if we want an environment where innovation and entrepreneurship thrives, where is that? All right, well, let's explore some ideas here. First of all, let's look at political systems, because political systems are in place to kind of set the guideposts for economic growth and so forth. So let's first look at political systems. Now, in order to understand political systems, it's helpful to take a moment and understand the ideas of individualism versus collectivism. All right, bear with me. This is going to matter. So individualism kind of exalts the needs of the individual over the state or the collective, right? Generally associated more with capitalism and democracy. We're going to explore that a little bit more. Whereas collectivism placed the needs of society or the group, the collective, ahead of the needs of the individual. So generally associated with socialism and totalitarianism. All right. Okay. Well, this, as we see, affects political systems, but let's explore these political systems and see how well they encourage innovation and entrepreneurism. All right. Let's first look at democracy. All right. Democracy, governed by the people, exercised either directly or indirectly through elected representatives. For the most part, democracies tend to be favorable to entrepreneurship and innovation. And we're going to talk about why. Okay. Now, there are, in fact, two main camps of democracy. We first have liberal democracy. Liberal democracy, a democratic, system based on the recognition of individual rights and freedoms, in which the decisions from direct or representative process prevail in many policy areas. Okay. Now, don't think liberal as in liberal and conservative if you're an American and you think liberal, Democrat, conservative, Republican. We're not using liberal in that term. Think of it in terms of best protecting individual liberties. Okay? Individual liberties. That means that a liberal democracy is more on the individualism side of the individualism versus collectivism equation, right? So they're looking out for things like democratic representation, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to assembly, individual rights, okay? Now, we also have social democracy. Now, social democracy stems from socialism. That is to say, a leftist form of liberalism, but more or less the same. Well, where does it differ? Well, it essentially has policies in a capitalist and democratic framework. It advocates for egalitarian measures, economic intervention, and social reform. In other words, think of it as a system in place to look after what is best for society, okay? Whereas liberal democracy, what is best for the individual's liberty, a social democracy, what is best for the collective of that democracy. But it's still democracy. And so if we look at countries that and there's many, many, many countries, this is just a few. If we look at countries that practice democracy, well, we have liberal democracies, United States, Japan, South Korea, Israel, Australia, just to name a few. And then we have more the social democracies. France, United Kingdom, Norway, Finland, the Netherlands. They're all democracies, but it's a question of where do they put the emphasis, on the individual rights or the needs of the collective. Okay? Now, that's democracies, but we also have totalitarianism. And this is one person or a political party that exercises control over most aspects of social life. Now, in general, on the whole, for the most part, is that enough qualifiers? Totalitarianism is a tough place to practice innovation and entrepreneurialism, okay? Because they really control all aspects of an economy. So let me show you what I mean. First, we have, say, a communist totalitarian regime. A great example of this would be China. China is a communist country. They're achieving social equity through a dictatorship. They set all the rules. And so when it comes to markets and innovation and creating new markets and setting prices and supply chains and so forth, they set all the rules, okay? So it's a little tougher to do business. Now, I say tougher. I did not say you don't do business there. Really, seriously, are you going to walk away from such a huge market? Of course you're not going to walk away from such a huge market. Just because we've got ourselves a tougher environment in which to do business doesn't mean we don't do business there. They're a huge business partner of ours. Okay, and when I say ours, I mean the US, but of the Western world as well. Then we have theocratic totalitarianism. Power is monopolized by a group by governing according to religious principles. So Saudi Arabia is a great example of a theocratic totalitarian regime. All right, they've got a monarchy. They're theocratic. They follow Islam. Their constitution is literally the Quran. Therefore, it's tougher to do business there because the religion pretty much rules the country. Does that mean we don't do business there? Of course not. All right. In no way, and we're going to talk about this more later, in no way are you going to find the perfect environment. You got to weigh the pros and cons and the risks and benefits, okay? And so, of course, we're going to do business with Saudi Arabia for a whole variety of reasons. It's just going to be tougher. Okay. All right. Now let's look at economic systems. We looked at political systems, but these political systems are in place really to provide the guideposts for economic policy. So let's talk about some economic policies. First, we have a free market. All right. Free market, one in which individuals and private firms make decisions based on customer needs and wants, right? The government doesn't supply any of the goods or services, and they don't set prices or anything. They let the market run itself. For the most part, all right, there's those qualifiers. For the most part, a free market system is very, very attractive to entrepreneurialism, innovation, and growth, okay? But then we've also, Why free markets? Well, because free markets really allow, the markets to be free, for the law of supply and demand to run its course. So what do I mean by the law of supply? Well, the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. So let's say that I'm a producer for a moment. I make stuff. I make videos. So I'm a producer. And I go, wow, you're willing to pay me all that money? Well, then I'm going to make a lot of these things. And in the same way, if a producer says, well, hold on, you're only willing to pay me a teeny tiny bit? Well, then I'm not going to make them anymore. It's not worth it. Actually, I make them anyway because I enjoy it, but you get the point. But now, on the other hand, we've got the law of demand, right? The higher the price, the less people will demand the good or service. So now I'm looking at it as a customer. I'm a customer and I buy water bottles. All right, here's a water bottle. I buy these things. So you're selling them for that much? Well, forget it. I'm not going to buy any of them. Too darn expensive. Whereas, wow, they only cost a teeny tiny bit. Well, then give me a whole bunch because I like all the different designs and logos and patterns and things like that, right? And as we talked about in a previous lecture, check out the link up here, right? With global global production and so forth, it is becoming less and less expensive to provide goods and services. So the law of supply and demand can really take off. Okay? All right. But now, that's with a free market economy. Then we got the command economy. The command economy, or a planned economy, is one in which the government or other centralized group determines wages, sets price, distributes resources and products, for everyone, right? For the most part, this is a tougher economic system in which to really grow and thrive. Because you don't get to decide prices, you don't get to decide your materials or where you get them, your supply chains, your customers don't get to choose, you don't get to choose what you make or what features you give. All these things are controlled and decided by the government. Tougher proposition. Now, here's the thing though, I got news for you. A free market economy? Doesn't exist. A command or control economy? Doesn't exist. Every economy in the world is a mixed economy. It just depends on where the dial is set. Okay, so what's a mixed economy? Well, it's one in which both individuals and government control resources and determine production methods. All right? So, yeah, I can decide what I buy and so forth, but the government decides, well, he needs power for this thing, which means he needs to plug it in, and we're going to control the power companies. This is in the United States. I apologize. In the United States, the government's going to say, you know what? We're going to control utilities. We're going to control water, power, gas, things like that. You're going to buy these things through government-controlled entities because we want to make sure that every American has equal access to important things like power and energy and so forth. But whatever you plug in, that's up to you, right? So it's a mixed economy. All right. Now, that being said, free market economic systems, really the best. So the closer we can get to a free market system, the more we can turn that dial toward free market and away from command or control economies, then the better it is for a business endeavor. So how do countries go about moving toward a free market system? Okay, well, there's really 3 steps that we look for countries to be doing in order to be attractive as a place in which to do business. All right. The first is deregulation. As you look around the countries of the world to figure out where you want to do business, you might want to look for signs of deregulation. That's removing the legal restrictions to free enterprise in a market economy. In other words, you don't want them to say, well, you can make water bottles, but they have to be an exact size, an exact shape, an exact color, because we control size and shape and color. And it's like, yeah, but my customers want something taller or wider or whatever. No, doesn't matter. We control it. Deregulation removes regulations that tend to stifle economic growth. The next one you want to look for is privatization, the transfer of ownership of state property to the private sector. Now, if you are doing business in a country, it's your business, it's your product, it's your service, it's your investment on the line. And so you want to make the decisions. That means that it is private to you, right? But if it's state-owned, if it's owned by the public, state-owned, then you don't get to make the decisions. The state does. And so that makes it much more difficult for you to be successful. Now, the third one you look for is legal systems. All right, this is important. The creation of laws that protect private property rights and contract enforcement. Listen, you've invested a lot of money, a lot of your resources and assets into this business. Well, you want to make sure that those investments are safe and legally protected. This means not only having laws on the books, but actually enforcement mechanisms in place that ensure that those laws are enforced. All right? So these are the things that you're looking for as you evaluate a country for its kind of free market quotient, if you will. All right. Now, all of that said, now you've kind of looked at some countries and so forth. How are you going to evaluate country attractiveness? Well, as I said before, you're never going to find the perfect country. I mean, ever. It doesn't exist, right? There's just too many factors. And so you're really looking for the right balance, right? The pros and cons, the risks and rewards. You're weighing all these to find the right balance. All right. So what should you be weighing? Well, we're going to look at three things that you can look at to kind of evaluate country attractiveness. The first one's the benefit. What's the long-term monetary benefit of doing business in this country? Long-term, because depending on your mode of entry, which we'll be talking about later on, you've got to be there a while to make a return on your investment. And you don't want to go to all the trouble of moving into a country if there isn't a really good long-term benefit for you. So what is the long-term benefit? Next one you want to look at is the cost. What is the political, economic, and legal cost in doing business in this country? As well as monetary cost. Gee, Lon, maybe you should have added that, right? So what's the cost of doing business in this country? Some countries have better reputations. Some countries you have to work a whole lot harder to be successful in. There are going to be costs no matter what. So you're weighing the benefits against the costs. And then ultimately, you need to look at the risks. Business is all about risk. And that's doubly so when you're looking at global opportunities. So the political, economic, and legal risks of doing business in that country. Are you going to lose your investment? Is it going to be taken over by the state? Is it going to fail utterly and so forth? You really need to think about what you're risking before you commit your resources to that endeavor. All right? And so, folks, there you go. That is a quick primer on evaluating global opportunities. All right. I hope this was helpful. We have a whole lot more to go over, so stick around. And in the meantime, have a fantastic day.